Hello and welcome to CreepGeeks Podcast, episode 219, season 5.
In this episode, feral humans, missing 411, and UAPs yes, UFOs no.
Yeah. So here we are again. Welcome back to the CreepGeeks Podcast. If your very first time listening to the podcast, we appreciate it. If you're a person who tunes in when we do them, we appreciate that too.
Yeah.
It's good to see you. Had a little break, so, you know, things are what things are. We come back with some news.
Yes.
Some interesting news. So, yeah, it's probably going to be much about nothing, but that's okay. Because it is what we said it was.
And what is that?
I'll tell you in a minute. Yeah, stay tuned for news you're uninterested in, right? Okay, so before we get started with the podcast, we have some things we need to take care of real quick. If you'd like to contact us, leave us a message or share. We have a toll-free number.
And that,
does it even matter anymore, toll-free numbers? I don't think it does. But anyway, we have a phone number for you.
That number is going to be 575-208-4025.
Yeah, you can call and leave us a message. We also have a website called CreepGeeks.com where you can click on the Contact Us link at the top, and you can type out your message if you so desire to share. Or, you know, give us little bits of encouragement, whatever you want to do there. It's cool. And we have a Facebook group that's pretty active where you can kind of like go see some of the funny stuff that we post. And if you want to share there, you can do that too. It's real easy to find. It's
CreepGeeks Facebook group.
Dun, dun, dun. We have Instagram. You can go see some of the funny pictures that we share in our investigations and things like that.
Yeah.
And that one's pretty hard to get to. Remember what it is? CreepGeeks Pod.
Yeah.
On Instagram. So basically, if you type CreepGeeks in there in the little search doodad, you'll find us. And if you don't find us, go back and look at the spelling of CreepGeeks. It's CreepGeeks instead of CREPE, which is crip.
Yeah.
The little garbage pancake thing that's, you know, makes you wish it was a big pancake.
No, they have their purpose.
Don't. What's the purpose?
They're light.
It doesn't matter what the purpose is.
They're light and delightful, and they give room in the meal for the other parts of what makes a crepe, which is
you
the
just
filling.
Described me, light and delightful.
Okay. Are you filled with fruit and whipped cream?
Yeah. Piss and vinegar.
Okay. That's a
Is
pickle.
it hate and discontent?
That's a pickle.
There we go. Okay, so anyway, moving back into the podcast, here we go. So we have a couple of different things to like to talk about, but before we do that, we need to go ahead and get into the 14 term of the day to sort of preface what we're going to be addressing later on in the podcast. In other words, it's what we're talking about, but the definition of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So that you go, oh, that's what it is. And then we kind of move into the podcast. So the definition or the 14 term of the day is
feral humans.
Yes. Now, here's the scoop. We're going to be talking about feral humans, but if you really go look for a definition of feral humans, you won't find one.
Yeah.
But you will find feral child.
Yes.
So there you go.
And a feral child, also known as wild child, is a human child who has lived isolated from human contact from a very young age, and having done so, has had little or no experience of human care, behaviors, or human language. There are several confirmed cases and other speculative ones. Feral children may have experienced severe abuse or trauma before being abandoned or running away. They are sometimes the subjects of folklore and legends, typically portrayed as having been raised by animals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the deal. Evidently, it's come up, and this has been sort of a thing that's been going on for a long time, but the subject of feral humans has really sort of regained some popularity, primarily on places like TikTok.
Yeah.
And it kind of started out with, you know, feral humans and Appalachian feral humans and that sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. About these people living off in the woods by themselves, and if you go where they are, you may never come back. Mm-hmm. Including, you know, like the idea of cannibalism.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's kind of sketchy. So I have heard myself the legends and lore of the Appalachian feral people. And being as now we are sort of, in and around the Appalachian area, like as in really close to the Appalachian area, it kind of made sense to talk about it. And there's been some people on TikTok that got a little angry about it, saying, you don't know what you're talking about, that and sort of thing. But guess what, man? This has been going around for a long time. And the idea of feral humans or wild men in the woods has been around for 1,000 years at least. What, you're disagreeing?
No.
That's right, because it has been sort of, And, some of it's legends and lore, but we kind of thought we'd go through and kind of talk about some of it because it is pretty interesting. And the idea of that there's this, group of people that live off in the woods completely isolated from society, but occasionally jump out there and grab a person to eat. It's kind of scary.
And it shows up in popular media. I mean, whether it's eating or something worse, far sinister, like in TV and movies.
Yeah.
I mean, even X-Files had a couple episodes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. X-Files had the one episode that I couldn't remember the name of where it was horrific. And I think they only showed it like once or twice where I don't even want to describe it because I won't be doing it any justice.
Was it the brothers and the mom?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason you've only seen that twice is because, from what I understand, that episode was banned for a while.
Yes. Due
to the insinuation of what was happening in that episode.
Yeah, like incest and
we're not going to say that word anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it was, but see, that's the whole thing though. That particular episode, if I remember correctly, with X-Files was sort of based off of legend and lore of something that happened in Kentucky.
Yeah. Gosh, now I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah, it doesn't matter because we got other stuff to talk about. So, in order to give you an idea what we're talking about with the whole feral human thing, there's a couple different things that may sort of refresh your memory. And one of them was the movie Nell.
Yeah.
And Nell had Clarice in it, from the Silence of the Lambs series. What's her name? Jodie Foster. And she was basically living on her own out in the middle of nowhere. And then Liam Neeson finds her, and she was the one who's like, talking like Jacob P. and all that stupid stuff. But she's an example of a wild child or a feral human because she had no contact past a certain point, had to raise herself, educate herself, feed herself, that kind of thing, was and sort of diverse from society.
Yeah.
The difference is that Nell was not going to smash you in the head with a hammer and eat you.
True.
So they put a real nice sort of, here's a different spin on things to make it nice and sort of that. But that's not always what you hear as far as what comes out in the media or legends and lore or local whisperings of feral people.
Yeah.
But it is something that shows up in the media, like you were saying, movies and things like that. It's been pretty popular.
Oh, it was the episode Home on X-Files, and it was the first one that was banned for repeated play for a long time, and the first one to ever get the viewer discretion advised warning.
Nice.
Yeah. So.
And why did it get that? Does it say why?
It had to carry a TV-MA rating upon broadcast due to the graphic content and suggestions.
Yeah, they don't actually say what it is, but it was like just really cringy.
Yeah.
And
it was actually part of, because I'm trying to read these little things, part of it was like the murders.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So. It was a pretty horrific episode, but it was an episode that definitely broke ground when it come to the idea of it. But so feral humans has regained popularity with people talking about it, like on TikTok, and it hasn't really gone out of the news. And you go back as far as 2012 and look at some of the things. I mean, it's been in and sort of shows up every so often about these people that breakaway society of people, inbred, violent. Typically not educated, the whole thing, the scary sort of like the hills people have, the hills have eyes kind of people / don't go up there. There's like mountain people that are like, wait, it's like
Lord of the Flies.
Well, not really Lord of the Flies. Lord of the Flies was more of a survival of the fittest kind of thing, but this is more of these people are so removed from society and they so don't adhere to our rules in society that eating you or abducting you or taking you, keeping you prisoner, all that sort of thing, and, breaking all society's rules, like with the incest insinuations and things like that, lack of cleanliness, education, nutrition, all the things you don't care about when you're a feral person that are shocking to us because we're so, stuck out there. It'd be almost the equivalent of, I don't want to paint a picture of like, the shining city on the hill, and you go out in the woods and it's just full of cavemen. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's kind of a hard thing to describe, but
yeah.
Okay, so before we really go into feral people and start really talking a little bit more great and agonized detail, I feel we must go ahead and talk about some of the disclosure information that may or may not be coming out towards the end of this month.
Oh.
Yeah, and this is the UFO disclosure information that may or may not be coming out at the end of this month. Right? So the UFO stuff that's been coming down, and everybody's like worried about disclosure, and it's going to be great, and the government's going to tell us all about UFOs and aliens and all that stuff. It's not going to happen. We told you that it wasn't going to happen, and it looks like it's not going to happen. So the reports that are probably going to come out, and this is according to a couple different places, but the reports that are probably going to come out here towards the end of the month is, and this is from insiders, is going to say pretty much that it isn't aliens that you know, but they can't say that it's aliens because they don't know.
Didn't we get this exact same report last year in the middle of 2020?
Yeah.
Well, it's not saying that it is.
Yeah.
And
we're not saying that it's not.
And it was over the film footage.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the only thing they're going to do is probably go through and declassify a bunch of reports, right? About 120 incidents over the past 2 decades that say that, hey, none of these things originated from any American military or any advanced U.S. government technology.
Okay.
So what they're saying is, without really saying anything, is that it's not us.
Which is
perfect if it really is you.
True. And that goes along with your theories that you've explained. That, it's a great...
I'm beginning to get to the point where, in my belief, I think that our military and other militaries of the world are not just like 50 years ahead in technology, but probably like a couple 100 years ahead in technology. Because if you follow the same sort of things that happened in the past, where, World War I, we're flying around in biplanes, and in World War II, we actually have jets and rockets.
Yeah.
And remote control things and everything else that goes along with that, radio control and things like that, and possibility of, the Nazi flying bell using alternative propulsions and things like that, is that we're way ahead of where we were.
And see, part of me is kind of like, there's no way that, like, and a good example would be American government is hundreds of years ahead, because unless they locked all those pilots and all those engineers and all those technicians away from human society, or gave them very strict protocols to live by, there'd be a leak somehow, or there
has been leaks.
There'd be more encounters with those people, like on a day-to-day basis, whether it's like, at Whole Foods, or you're eating dinner and you see 2 top secret scientist-y people, you'd encounter those people, and eventually there'd be either a leak or more common knowledge about it.
Who's to say that there hasn't been? I mean, if you look at it all the time, you got all sorts of stuff where it's like, okay, well, number 1, you're sworn to secrecy. Number 2, you're trying to be a patriot. Number 3, we'll kill your family if you say anything. Number 4, we'll discredit you. Number 5, who's to say that your brake lines that have been cut in your car are not a warning? I mean, if you really look at it,
and see, that cuts into my however that I was about to say. And that however is, we spent time in the Southwest, and we all know that many of the top secret military bases are in the Southwest due to the nice level plains in the desert and the remoteness of that area. And even spending time in the desert, in the small, weird, quirky towns in New Mexico, we did run into the odd person every now and then. Just whether it was like in my work where I was working with, and we'd run into these like borderline eccentric geniuses that had something going on with them. I'm starting to think maybe it is possible to secret away these brilliant minds and this brilliant technology.
Because, I mean, if you had somebody come up to you on the street and say, hey, man, I just escaped from this desert facility where we've been taking crashed alien technology and reverse engineering it, and there's this element that basically facilitates like gravitational flight, and I think they're on to me and they're going to kill me, but I want to go ahead and tell you before so I can spread the word. What would you think?
Okay, Bob Lazar.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then, I mean, you hear weird stuff like that in places like Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, even Texas. And it just kind of gets like, because there's this typecast persona put upon those areas.
Yeah, nut jobs.
Yeah.
But there's nut jobs everywhere. But what if they're really almost, say, half of those nut jobs are really speaking the truth?
Yeah. I mean, how weird, like when we went to Los Alamos, like we drove up there because we were going to Bandelier. The people there were different. And Los Alamos laboratories, that type of stuff.
Well, yeah, they have to be different. You live in a place where secrecy and everything else is very important. So a lot of people, sort of keep to themselves, that kind of thing. But I mean, okay, so the easiest thing to do to sort of, I think, curb any release of information from somebody important, maybe a scientist that's been secreted away somewhere, is to discredit them.
Discredit and deniability.
You don't even have to deny it. You just discredit it and let them implode on themselves. And the more that they scream louder and louder that there's something out there, the less people are going to believe them.
Okay.
It's real easy.
But if all this that's in the news right now is less about saying UAPs yes, UFOs no, then it's basically saying it's not us, but now it's okay to just say it's an unknown.
Sure.
And we're not going to take any ownership.
No. Why would we? Now you can believe whatever the hell you want, and you'll never know what it is because now it's so diluted.
Yeah,
it's brilliant. Actually, they denied most everything for a long time, right? With Project Blue Book and things like that. Now they're just saying, "Hey, I don't know," and so now it's up to you to decide. So if you're going to keep screaming aliens, okay, you're just on par with everybody else for the past 40 years. Oh, it's aliens. Still can't prove anything. But at the same time, is it something else? Is it another military? Well, I don't know. It's not us, so we don't know what it is. This is the equivalent of, we think there's something out there, but I have no idea.
But this, and this approach that the U.S. government is taking, and then our media's reaction to it, and then the paranormal UFO community's reaction to it. It just makes me want to, honestly interview somebody from, Germany, Russia, even the UK, an average Joe like us who has the interest, and ask them what their government's approach is. Because,
well, I mean, you don't even have to ask. You can see it. There's a lot of countries who've actually released all the information that they had, and then what did they say? We don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Brazil is one. Even England released a bunch of stuff.
Brazil, yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah.
Even Russia. Yeah, Russia to a certain degree has gone through and released a bunch of information. Hey, a lot of stuff they keep quiet, but at the same time, they're open to report it, see it, report it.
See, I thought Russia was still in the whole, it was a top secret laser or, top secret.
Well, they're going to say that because they always do that. Russia, as a whole, has always spoken at both sides of its face.
Yeah.
It's true. Our space program is better than yours. And is it, though? Not really. Our warfare is better than yours. Is it, though? No, not really. But at the same time, you don't really know what's true and what's not true. And what does that do? It keeps you on edge. You don't know if they're just pulling your leg.
Yeah.
You don't know what they really got. You don't know if it's, you don't really know. And that's what the U.S. government is saying. Hey, it's not us. We don't know what it is.
Okay.
So now you don't really know. So what they've actually done is made the entire thing uncertain. And there's going to be people in the entire UFO researching organization that are like, well, we have these things in place and we know exactly this has got to be from outer space and it's aliens and everything else, but you can't prove it and it's the same crap.
And that's the problem. It's so much the same crap or rhetoric, which is funny because that's usually a political word, but it just feels like the same rhetoric over and over again here in the U.S. and with.
Well, yeah, it's a different tactic.
It's tiresome now. I'm getting a little annoyed with.
Maybe that's the entire point,
and that stinks because all I want right now is to have somebody walk up to us and be like, "Hey, can I tell you my UFO experience?" It's getting to the point where I'm more interested in that, or Joe Blow's video footage than I am in this whole entanglement with.
Yeah, because I still think we're just looking at remote controlled vehicles, remotely operated vehicles. I think it's drones. I think it's AI, it's drones, and it's drones that have the ability now to use an alternate form of propulsion.
Yes, But for me, like the encounters, those have died down significantly. And those,
at least the reported ones that you hear.
Yeah. And it's like, where are those now? And I want to hear more about those. Have there been any? Are there any notable ones? That's what I want to hear more than everybody saying, it's not us.
Well, I mean, there you go. What's happened here is that by saying we don't know what it is, and possibly more than likely, according to the insiders releasing these documents and stuff about documented incidents that have occurred over the past 20 years or so, is that they are effectively deflating the balloon that was blowing up, and people are like, I'm telling you, there's stuff out there. I mean, because what's happened here? We've got disclosure that's supposed to be occurring. People are trying to return to normalcy. There's all sorts of stuff, and so it's just kind of going back the way it was, and I still think it's advanced technology. I'm not saying that there's not instances that just cannot be explained, and we just don't have that level of technology, and it could be created or influenced from, aliens or whatever. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, some of the footage that I've seen, it doesn't strike me anymore as being otherworldly.
Yeah.
Because I can see some of the stuff that occurs that if you have advanced technology and you're not confined by a biological restriction, which would be a person, you can do all sorts of stuff. For the most part, what keeps our planes and jets and stuff from flying faster than they ever have, it's the person. You got to worry about the person in the cockpit.
And that's the thing, because like a lot of some of the leaked or recent footage lately, if you watch it closely for things other than what everybody wants you to look at, obviously this is weird. And you look at, for me, speed, and then just look at some of the unmanned and missile testing that happens like at salt flats where they're just doing the straight distance. It's the same movement and same speed, just up in the air for me.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know. So at the end of the day, all of this is frustrating. It's still frustrating. We still don't know anything. There hasn't been any so far really groundbreaking release of information that points to little green men or grays or avians or reptiles or whatever. It's so far the same as it was before. Much ado about nothing. Yeah. And, we caught some heat when we were saying, hey, man, there ain't nothing really going to happen here from, places. And it seems like a lot of that heat's just kind of going away because it is what it is. I mean, honestly, and here's something that probably even makes even a little bit more sense than anything else. What if it's not really aliens that has influenced our technology? What if it's ancient technology that's influenced our technology?
I mean, like lost technology that's getting refound?
Yeah, ancient alien stuff.
Yeah, like the whole
Which one makes more sense? Because, I mean, when they find, evidence of human civilization that doesn't make any sense, and no way you could do that by hand. Well, you could if you were in the future, right? And the future is always somebody's past. I don't know. So let's get back to the scary people eaters.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, because feral people is something that freaks me out. And it only freaks me out because we live in a place, and I have pretty much frequented this area off and on my entire life, where when you run off in the woods, these woods aren't like other woods. Mm-hmm. We've been in forests. We've been out in the desert. We've been places, and I've never felt anything weird necessarily or odd or didn't want to be there except for a couple times.
Yeah.
When we go out in the woods here, I feel it all the freaking time. There's something here, and a lot of people do. Some people don't. And they'll just say, whatever, I don't feel anything. It doesn't mean you're right. It just means you're probably one of the first ones to go. So I look at it, right?
Okay.
Like we went out and did the Brown Mountain Lights thing, and we were the only ones there, and the people that were with us left.
Yep.
And we stayed like exactly 26 minutes and rolled out because it changed. The entire atmosphere changed. Being there changed. It changed. It felt like you need to go right freaking now. Don't look back. Don't acknowledge anything, just leave. And that's exactly what we did.
Yeah. I was pulling the cart, our equipment cart, full speed, and I had Pepper because not only did I feel as though we were being watched from the left, which was really weird because there was more space to the right of us, you know, as you're leaving Wiseman's View. I heard something, and that something I heard just really bothered me.
Yeah, it was time to go.
Yeah.
And the goofy thing is that it wasn't on, it was just from the trees.
And then the light, remember the light?
Yeah, it was just, it was time to go. And there's some like loose rules of thumb when it comes to being out in the woods out here.
Yeah.
You know, if you hear something, don't acknowledge it. If something whistles, don't whistle back. Don't whistle in the woods at all. If you hear your name, don't respond. It's just basically don't look back and get gone. Get out.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you acknowledge, that's when bad things can happen. And are you going to say it's funny? That's the way it is in other places too?
No, because it's funny because it's almost like those are the Appalachian rules.
They are the Appalachian rules.
That are kind of similar to like the old Fae rules. Like
exactly.
Don't acknowledge the fairies. Don't pick up or notice something that they leave out in the open.
Don't take gifts.
If they try to get your attention, don't follow them, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's sort of the same thing in these woods that are out here.
There are places here where you don't feel it's remote until you look at it from like, I don't know, like eagle eye view or from like a map.
And that's another rule. Don't look in the trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a thing. And so those are like the Appalachian basic rules, you know. Don't acknowledge, really what it boils down to. Don't look in the trees. Don't whistle. If you hear a whistle, don't whistle back. If you don't whistle in the woods at all. Like, don't do these basic things. And you think, okay, well, that's just like scary stuff that you get told to keep you scared, right? Because if you're scared of the woods and you're growing up in the woods, you're not going to run off in the woods, right? So your parents don't have to go looking for you because you're not going there because it's scary. But what if the scare and the fear that they have comes from a generational thing?
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like these scary, things that we talk about are not because we're just trying to scare you and keep you in the woods. It's a cautionary tale of what's happened in the past, and it's been spread throughout, and you should follow these rules.
I mean, kind of like the uncanny valley, which is built into our psyche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what if it's like hinged on the fact that maybe there actually is something out there? Because if you look at some of these rules that we just call it the Appalachian rules, right?
Yeah.
Something is basically occurred to make those rules become rules. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't just exist here in like Appalachia or Appalachia.
Appalachia.
Right. If you say Appalachian or Appalachia, you're wrong. It's Appalachia.
You've been saying it.
I've been saying it back and forth to hopefully piss people off because there's some people that say it's Appalachia.
Yeah.
But it's Appalachia or Appalachian. Like app and then latch.
I just have to try hard not to put a B in it for some reason.
Well, we all have our shortcomings, but that's okay. But, and that's the thing, though. We've been places where it's been like that, where you go into an area and you just feel like you got to go or you shouldn't be there. And we're not talking that sort of natural feeling you get from like, oh, there's a bear.
Yeah.
It's like, go, flee. It's a different level of scared. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So when you have those sort of rules in place where it's like, here's the rules you should adhere to. And a lot of people say just straight up stay out of the woods at night, period. These people grew up here, and these are not the people that, are sitting somewhere else and read the story and go, well, the reason why you think you've seen Mothman is because there's large birds in the area. And even though you've lived there your entire life, you would not be able to identify a barn owl or a big blue heron or something like that.
Yeah.
But me here in New York, in the city, looking at a picture, could see how I could make the leap between Mothman and a big bird. But you don't know that, even though you're in the area and have experienced everything and have firsthand knowledge, which is the whole sort of looking down on somebody because they believe something different.
Yeah.
So, keeping that in mind, feral people. is the hills have eyes and the feral people and the idea of people living off in the woods with no rules and all that stuff sort of the reason behind the rules in the woods and don't go off by yourself in the woods and all the sort of things that you look at when it comes to the whole being scared in the woods kind of thing? I don't know, because, I mean, it would make sense. If your family's telling you not to go out in the mountains because you might not ever come back, because there's people out there that may snatch you and eat you. And then you also hear about, you know, out in the desert where there's been like nuclear families out there that are the same thing. They come, you know, it's like there's always these groups of stories about people who sort of live in breakaway societies. And you even have some of the native tribes that were fighting giants that were eating people.
Or their old forest brothers who were furry, large
wild men eating people, or even the little people who were taking people off into the woods and not having them come back.
Oh, we might have another story soon.
Okay. Yeah. So it kind of gets into, you know, the idea that there may be something out there that you're unaware of that live in these remote areas, whether it's little people, whether it's goblins, whether it's just regular old feral people who are inbreeding and eating each other and you too, right? If it's the idea that maybe there's something more supernatural like rakes, if that even exists, versus the Wendigo, which you should never speak its name, versus the, you know, shadow people / shadow walkers.
Elementals.
/ elementals that are out there. What's the deal with the woods, man, and going out in the woods? And, you know, there's been documented things that basically talk about some of the stories of the wild, right? And we're talking about like wild men of the hills, people who've gone and left civilization, you know? And you also have the idea that maybe Sasquatch is also referred to as the wild man and the Bigfoot people. And maybe the Bigfoot tribes that are out there, if you want to call them that, you know, are the ones that are snatching people when they go in the woods because maybe they've infringed on territory. You know? So I don't know. So you've got stories of wild men that are out there, like people who live fairly in nature as any wild animal would do. And it's been part of our myth and legends since the dawn of civilization, and some of the earliest contribution to literary fiction is the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? Who basically is first confronted and befriended by a wild man, Enkidu, who becomes his closest ally and friend. So, and it says there's been a wealth of scholarly interpretation when it comes to that sort of thing. So if that's one of the earliest epics where this man has a wild man for a friend, we're talking Gilgamesh here. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It's kind of like, which part of this do you want to pick? You know, is the wild man in the woods related to the feral people sort of aspect of it, or is it all sort of related? Because feral people is even more nefarious or scary to me, because if there is a group of people that live out in the woods or in national parks or somewhere like that are basically grabbing people and eating people and doing all that sort of things, that's way more scary to me than, like, say, Bigfoot.
But
because it's just people. There can be people anywhere. You can be out there and they can just eat you. They're just like, these people are so, something's wrong with them to the point where they can eat you.
It would be interesting if there are these feral people in the quantities and numerous circumstances like we're hearing about on TikTok and Instagram and places like in YouTube. However, this example, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is like one of the most earliest examples of feral or wild people. It was brought about right around the time of documenting your history and storytelling. Sure. So an advancement in civilization. And I find it very odd that our first examples of staying out of the woods occurred as we started to become more civilized creatures. Now, with everything that's happened in the past year and a half, where we were kept away from nature and we were forced indoors. And, you know, the past 30 years, we've become more indoor creatures and more quote-unquote civilized. This is just another way to detach us from nature, in my opinion, and not seek out to become a breakaway civilization.
It could be, or maybe it's cautionary. To become less wild.
Let me put my tinfoil hat on and say, isn't that exactly what they want, for us to not break away from society and, you know, to conform and not be so remote and hard to reach? So I think a lot of the stuff that's happening on TikTok and YouTube and stuff where they're exploring these, these feral people cases, it's almost like a reverse romanticism. Like, heck yeah, there are feral people. Isn't this awesome? That's how I feel about it.
Well, I don't know, because the ones that I've seen have been warnings.
Yeah. Or shock.
And then people denying that, that's even a thing. And then some people that live in the area are all offended by it. How dare you say that? When you're talking about things that have occurred and been documented and weird incidents that have been out there. And it all sort of ties up to different things like, look at like the whole missing 411 phenomenon where you have lots, and we're talking thousands of people missing from our national parks.
Yeah.
So there's been sort of the thing now where you've got people missing from national parks. Missing 411's been documented. You're talking about David Pilates and all that, and his passed away son and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
They've really started documenting that sort of thing. And the cave systems where, hey, we have this large underground network of caves that are all over the place, and a lot of these missing instances occur
within a mile or miles.
Sometimes even closer, but like in and around the same area, these cave systems. And so there's like, is there something in the caves that's doing this? Are there feral people living in these caves that are snatching people? Or is it Bigfoots or animals or goblins or whatever, creatures living in these caves that are snatching people?
Gosh, I wish I could remember it. There was a Mysterious Universe episode about that, like the cave that's in Arizona, like the Lost Dutchman mines, and how they connected to Carlsbad, and how I guess it was Sitting Bull and some of the people from his tribe took westward explorers through there and warned them, we only go down here at certain times because there's the others.
Yeah. Well, and there's also there were the others were sealed in some of the cave networks because they had to go kill most of them because they were eating tribes people.
Yeah.
And so you've got lots of instances of cannibalism and things like that, and tribes fighting other tribes, and people, little people being not so nice and that sort of thing, and all this folklore associated with it all. But it almost makes me wonder, because they've gone and they've looked at, and I say they, just the general public and people doing some of the research have sort of like looked at the cave systems and are making a loose sort of idea that a lot of these, missing people cases occur in and around where these cave systems are. And now there's a loose association between that and the possibility of Bigfoot because, you have it like, oh, is it possible that Sasquatch is taking these things and these peoples and the children's or whatever and are, sending them back and all this stuff. And my thought kind of went to this the other day when I was, turbo picking a lot of this out, trying to figure it out. And when I realized this is a really deep rabbit hole. What if you have, just say, secretive bands of feral people that live all over the place? And what if the government knows about them?
Yeah.
Because that would make sense. If you're a park ranger and your job is in the park, chances are you've run across people that you probably know that are not normal.
And they talk about that every year with the Appalachian Trail.
If you're a park ranger, do you document those experiences? I'm sure you probably do. And you probably know how many weird, like, feral type people might be living in your park. Do you disclose that to the public? No, because if you said, hey, there's families of weirdos up here in the woods, you're not going to, basically, people are not going to go, you're going to lose funding. It's going to be a thing where you probably don't want to tarnish the natural splendor that you're trying to promote and take care of and foster, right?
Yeah.
So what if a lot of these missing 411 cases that are in and around these cave systems in national parks and occur in national parks are actually caused by, like, feral people? Maybe there really is feral people. Mm-hmm. And if you're a feral person, chances are you're going to have the long hair, be covered in sticks and twigs, and, you're probably going to be able to keep out of sight and all that stuff. You're not going to go running up and digging a dumpster necessarily, or at least you know how to be secretive, and you're already a human.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to be smarter than a monkey.
Yeah.
Or a primate. And so when you have some of these cases where magically the federal government shows up or the army shows up and black helicopters show up to try to help the search parties, but not really help them because they're not actually interacting with them, find these missing people, what if they're there to make sure that the feral people aren't involved in these missing cases? And since they are fully aware of these feral people and probably track them somehow, keep tabs on them through information maybe derived from sightings and national park rangers and that sort of thing, and they know where they are, that they know that they need to go in there and make sure that the feral people aren't the ones that are actually doing it.
So
sort of keep them in line.
Yeah, so if they're making sure that they aren't responsible, that still means...
Or taking care of them if they are responsible.
That means, though, that if they're not responsible, there's still no explanation for some of the missing people.
Sure, but it would explain some of the instances where you've searched everywhere and all of a sudden the missing person shows up. If you're a feral person and you're fully aware of what's going on, like maybe you snatched somebody because you're a feral person, and all of a sudden, you know, your area, which has been relatively unencumbered by humans, is now full of like hunters and volunteer rescue people and flying helicopters and barking dogs. You know, the only reason why they're there is because you snatched somebody. And so maybe you need to give it back so they'll go away.
And that also explains, because one of the things that Paulides has expressed in a lot of the cases was the unwillingness for the dogs to track.
Yeah.
So if it's a band of feral humans,
or if it's a bunch of humans that these dogs know ain't right.
Yeah.
And they would know.
They're going to smell that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because... Because
maybe the dogs know that they're not just tracking one person. Maybe the dogs know that there's a group of 20 or 30 people and it's a different animal altogether. You know, dogs track animals all the time, right? But you don't rarely ever see them go after a whole flock of animals.
Yeah, and they also smell temperament.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, you know, and what if some of these, you know, bodies that actually show back up in areas that have been searched multiple times have been returned because the other people in the feral people group, dude, you did a bad thing. You're bringing all this attention to us. And it would explain some of the other stuff, too, like clothes being folded in place, you know, and also shoes being put on backwards and weird stuff like that. If you're a feral kid who knows nothing but living in the woods, you might have a hard time knowing how shoes go on feet.
True. And that, just saying that, though, makes me think of something else. There is, for the people like Missing 411 and people who investigate these national park disappearances, there's been these two notable factors for some of these people who go missing. In the original research, it was noted a lot of the people that went missing were overly brilliant. They were savants in certain things, or at least highly intelligent in some things. And other people may have been on the spectrum, which doesn't mean you're not smart, but it does mean you may have you have something different about you.
Different attributes.
Yes. But just dealing with those two different groups of people, there's a lack of human civility in them. That,
to say it's a lack of humanity.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. It is. It is a lack of humanity. There may be the desire in both those two groups of individuals. So if they were confronted by a feral person, it would be easier to just go, yep, that's it. I'm going to go live with the feral people.
Yeah, or maybe the feral people have their own lack of humanity because they're feral people, and possibilities of genetic abnormalities because of inbreeding or whatever makes them more common and relatable to each other. Mm. Like, oh, you know, I relate to you because you have some of the mannerisms that I have. You're off, right? I'm off.
Yeah.
And I'm using air quotes. Not really, but you can't tell because we're on a podcast. But, I mean, it would make probably the idea of them being less of a stranger.
Yeah.
Because they would probably have less, you know, preconceived notions about you, covered in hair and looking weird and rotted teeth and everything else, because you don't have those same rigid norms applied in your thinking, because most people that are on the spectrum, there is a sort of a lack of like rules, and I shouldn't say rules. You know, like social rules, like
societal
space.
Norms.
Yeah, like maintaining space.
Oh,
you don't walk up in close talk 2 inches from somebody's face.
The same could be said about some of the very brilliant people out there too.
Well, yeah. Well, a lot of them, you know, they're geared that way. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, that would make sense. And a lot of those older people that may be sort of considered to be brilliant, but a little bit off or whatever, are definitely more childlike. You know? So if they're more childlike, it would make sense for maybe groups of feral people to look at, you know, children, and maybe they're grabbing children for their gene pool, and maybe they're eating them, or maybe it's a combination of all that. So what if a lot of what we know to be stay out of the woods and the missing 411 stuff with the cave systems and everything else is really large groups of feral people that are being sort of had their eye kept on by the government that are out there. And when they go too far and start interacting too crazy and becoming too public, then the government steps in to a certain degree. And what if these people that are feral people have sort of gotten to the point over time where they're really just not feral people anymore? They're just sort of an offshoot race of humans. Like, what if they've sort of morphed their own selves into kind of Neanderthalistic sort of, race? Isn't that kind of weird? I mean, it actually would explain a ton of stuff, And there's been instances where people run across feral people, but I tell you, man, a park ranger knows who normally inhabits this park. And I say his because I'm just being gender inclusive. I'm not saying him because there's, because park rangers are there. They're there all the time. They know what to look for, because not only do you have park rangers, but you also have people that work in the parks that, blaze the trails and do trail maintenance and that sort of thing. They're aware of weather patterns and indigenous things, and they're aware of all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you would definitely know if you just got a random person living in the woods. They would leave signs. And there's also instances where people that could be considered to be mentally unstable run off in the woods and just do wood stuff. And I mean, they're aware of the missing persons and the police reports and all that. They get bulletins too. I mean, they would know. Yeah. And they're also told to not talk about stuff like that, because that's not what you're there to do. You're there to promote the beauty of the park and all the wonders that the park provides. You're not there to go, don't go down there because there's a pack of wild people that may eat you. Because if you told me that, if we pulled up in the great white buffalo or the albino rhino, our camper vans, right, one that we used to have and the one that we currently have, and a park ranger walked up and said, hey man, there's bands of wild people down there, be careful because they eat people, I'm going to believe you. Because I didn't get where I am today going, oh yeah, I'll show you, I'm going to go down there and get killed by a bear. I'm going to go jump in the zoo pit and take a picture with a smiling polar bear. I know better.
Remember when we spoke to that person who belonged to the Park Service in Jimenez, and he was talking about weird stuff that happened out there?
Yeah, and don't go there, and I'll never go there.
And how the road building equipment was getting destroyed.
Right.
I mean, but then I'm also like, maybe they build the forest roads and do maintenance every year to kind of get
keep them, like, run them off.
Yeah, like make the feral people understand here's the boundaries.
Yeah, or whatever's out there.
Yeah.
And if you're a feral person living in the woods, after a while, if you don't want to wear clothes, what are you going to wear? Animal skins.
Yeah.
Sticks and twigs for camouflage. You run around like you're wearing a big ghillie suit all the time. So what if a lot of these Sasquatch sightings are just big, mutant, inbred feral people? Maybe there really are Sasquatch.
We need to stop saying the I word too many times on
this
episode.
What I word? I don't know what you're talking about. You're the one that's more worried about it than I am.
Yeah.
What's the I word?
The X-Files episode.
What, inbred?
Yes.
How is that a bad word?
'Cause.
No, it's not. Don't worry about it. Who cares? It is what it is. We're speaking truth here, probably. Maybe. You can't prove it, and you can't deny it.
There's an
Inbred's not a bad word. We're not.
Algorithm.
It doesn't matter about the algorithm. Because we're not talking about the C word. C-O-N, conspiracy. We're not talking about that. And we're not talking about that thing that's kept us all locked up.
Yeah.
Which is looking less like it was a thing than before.
But the reason I don't want you to say that word is because one of the articles we have linked to in the podcast notes, if you want to follow along with anything we've talked about, check the podcast notes for each podcast episode. They do mention how the topic of the feral people in national parks is kind of going crazy all over the TikToks. And that means somebody is paying attention to what everybody's talking about.
Well, here's the thing, though.
Yeah.
They are paying attention, but it's a resurrected old thing. Because I went back as far as 2012 with news articles talking about people living in parks like wild people.
Yeah.
And it seems to pop up every couple of years where this gets resurrected and brought back in the news again. Yeah. And, so it happens periodically so this is not a new thing. What this actually is younger people just now figuring out that this is a thing. Because there's wild man and the wild man sort of stories about either running across people that live in the wild or running across the wild man, whether it's Bigfoot or whatever, has been around for well over 1,000 years. And it happens a lot. And you've got like tribal folklore, and you've got native folklore, and you've got, folklore from people who came here from same thing. But the Irish have something where they talk about that sort of thing. The
perspective on this article, though, is kind of showing that it's now starting to get paid attention to, whether it's algorithms or social media. Somebody's paying attention.
Well, yeah, it's been brought back out.
They're linking to things like very modern things like Vice or how stuff works, outside, all these more public,
more current things, because this is the new young thing.
Public platforms that have a more noticeable following. So my concern that, too much gets said, too little gets said, it's based in that whole, when we talk about something and it gets followed along on social media and tracked, makes me want to go be a feral person.
No, I'm not going out in the woods and, eating animals, raw animals. And I'm not doing all that stuff because, it's hot. Mm-hmm. It's hot. And so you're going to have to find a cave because caves are typically nice and cool. So I live in a cave, but then you got to find a cave where there ain't a whole lot of people that know where that cave is. Because if you know about a cave, chances are somebody else knows about the cave and they might show up.
And it's not slippery or dusty.
Yeah. So then you got to turn around and figure out a way to keep those people out. So what do? You take them, you don't let them go, eat them maybe. I don't know. It's a thing. I can see how this was snowballing into something else. I think living out and being, off in the woods, the furthest thing from your mind is going to be, I hope nobody sees me, because you're going to try to get out as far out as possible. You're going to try to get away, but maybe you can't get away. I don't know. The whole thing is aggravating and troublesome.
And that's the thing, because one of these talks about how the breakaway civilization, feral people groups are getting noticed in places like Tennessee, which to me doesn't seem that big of a state for something like this to occur.
No, you are absolutely crazy. And let me tell you why.
I could understand the cave theory, but I don't know. I don't think it's
the idea of people living in the mountains, secluded, away from everybody else, living their own thing, doing their own thing, having their own society and their own societal norms and all that stuff. You're talking about Appalachian people.
Okay.
And to call them mountain people or hillbillies or whatever, don't go up there, the hillbillies are up there, is completely disparaging to talk to them.
Okay.
I understand that, but you got to remember the Appalachian Mountains is where most of this is really concentrated. You're talking about Kentucky. You're talking about the Appalachian Mountains in general, all the way down into, you're talking about Kentucky, you're talking about North Carolina, Tennessee, and all the way up. So this is where most of this is originating. This whole TikTok trend and a lot of what you see on the news that's been being brought back up again is about the Appalachian Mountains in general.
Okay.
So that's where it's at. That's where it comes from. You even have a case like in the Smoky Mountains where what happened to Dennis Martin, right? Where Dennis Martin, it's a story that sort of resurrected some of this because that story came back out again and became popular, and somebody picked it up and said something on TikTok, and then somebody else disputed it on TikTok, and they started arguing back and forth, and the popularity sort of blew up. You got one person who says, don't go out in the woods because, the possibility that this may happen to you, you may run into feral people, and you have another person that says, I've lived here all my life, and what you're saying is crazy.
Okay.
And then the war is being fought in the comments section, and it's spreading. So if you look at the story of Dennis Martin, he was 6 years old in 1969. He was wearing a bright red shirt when he and his brother, along with two other boys from Louisiana, who just met, planned a sneak attack on relaxing adults in Spencefield, bald on the Appalachian Trail. It's a Father's Day hike in Tennessee-North Carolina border, which what's coming up? Father's Day is coming up, right?
Yeah.
And this is along the Tennessee-North Carolina border. William Martin, his father Clyde, and two boys and others started at Cades Cove. They hiked to Russell Field, where they camped overnight, and they made their way into Spence Field, where they met a group, ironically also named Martin, from Louisiana. It was late in the afternoon. The boys were enjoying each other's company. They were playing. They were trying to sneak around, and they're being sneaky with their sneak attack. And the boys knew that the boys were up to something. right? Because they're trying to sneak up on them, right? Because they're playing. And they basically did a sort of a pincer movement where they're trying to basically head them off, right? They watched as 3 of the boys went one way to sneak back through the brush, and they also watched this dentist, the one that had the bright red shirt, snuck off in the other direction for all intents and purposes to basically just walk off the face of the earth. Mm-hmm. And it says the 3 boys performed their scare all in good fun, and when Dennis didn't pop up from another angle, William got up to look for him, and it said he hadn't been out of sight for more than 5 minutes, but William's search quickly turned frantic. Father ran back up the trail towards Russell Field trying to find the boy, thinking that maybe got turned around and went in the wrong direction. And, they hiked out to the ranger station. They got there after 9 o'clock, and a huge, massive storm arrived, drenching the mountains in a massive rainfall, dropped the temperatures into the 50, and next day the search that started and continued.
Oh, that's total missing 411 right there.
Right, exactly. It was hampered by the conditions, but as the word spread of the missing boy, massive response grew, and so we're talking about places where we've been. Cage Cove Camp, Spencer Field, right?
And see, I think that's part of my hang-up is, we've been there. Other people have been there. It's still only an hour, 2 hours away from a McDonald's. That's my hang-up.
Right.
I'm talking about, like, when I think feral people living deep in the woods, I'm thinking like Glacier National Park, where, like, it's 30 miles out.
Right, I get what you're saying, but you're also, you've been in these woods. These woods are so dense that you can step off the trail and nobody will see you anymore.
True.
It's so packed in there and it's so deep, and you've got family that live there. There's places now where if you see the driveway to make the turn to go up to, you're not going because you're not allowed there. It's obvious you're not allowed there. You don't belong there, and you probably might not come back. And you've been out when you've gone out and delivered food, right?
Yeah.
And doing that, what's that called? Your Foothills Food Hub and the distribution and stuff, and doing
Foothills Food Hub. We do delivery services for people who can't make it out.
Right, and I'm sure that from riding around with the local, he's basically said, "Don't ever go there. You shouldn't go there." And this is part of it. Except you're deeper in these mountains and stuff. There's places we can go right now where it's 18 miles of dirt roads. You have no idea where you are, and you're still basically one mountaintop away from 7-Eleven.
Which is funny because, like, okay, so, I do this humanitarian food nonprofit where we help people get food, people who need food and stuff like that. And my driver, Randy, he is, he's worked fire, rescue. He also works for this delivery thing. And he has told me stories about having to go up to some of these scenarios where it is like 8 miles of driving on a dirt road, and then you turn left onto mud for a whole nother mile.
Yeah.
And you can't even get fire and rescue up there. And then in another instance, we'll have somebody like one of our family friends who cleans houses and has to go to a mansion with the same directions, So that's the dichotomy that I'm struggling with, because I keep going back to thinking, like deep in the caves of Kentucky, which is a little bigger than Tennessee, or, the entire state of Montana. Yeah, but see,
here's the whole thing, though. These mountains are so packed in, and they're so dense. It doesn't matter whether you're in Kentucky or Tennessee or anywhere else.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're talking about Appalachian people who came from Europe primarily and settled where there was nobody else that could do their own thing has been this way for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years.
Okay.
And, even when you go back and look at the Revolutionary War, and they sent down all these British troops, like, we're going to take, Virginia and North Carolina and Tennessee. We don't even need to send that many people. And they got their asses completely handed to them by the Appalachian people. They basically said, this entire area is off limits. Do not go here. We'll leave them alone.
Yeah. We had something pop up in our Facebook memories, the Linville Gorge Caverns.
Yep.
They had soldiers hiding out down there for like over a month.
Yep.
And people were just walking overhead of.
And you also had one of the British generals talk a little trash about the Appalachian people, and the Appalachians snuck all the way up to him, 150, 200 miles away, and killed the dude where he stood there talking trash to his people. And then came, and they had no idea they were. So it's a thing. These are unique people, and we're talking about generations of unique people, but it also sort of gets into that offshoot where maybe since we're so secretive that you know less about them, and since you know less about them, you're going to put these negative connotations with the feral human thing. But it does make sense. And then, let's not forget about one of the greatest feral human stories of all time, and these people weren't even that feral, Deliverance.
Yeah.
They go on a hiking trip, and what happens? Here it is 30, 40 years later, and I'm talking to the guy that played the banjo, the kid on the porch. I talked to him for an hour and a half at the Georgia Bigfoot Festival.
At a Bigfoot festival, y'all.
Yeah. And I'm talking to him, and he's like, aren't you going to ask me about the movie? I'm like, no. And he's like, good. I'm tired of talking about it. I'm like, well, why are you here? And he's like, well, I didn't have much else to do. He was the kid playing the freaking banjo.
I remember. Yeah.
He's, we're sitting there smoking a cigarette, talking to each other about stuff, right? And it was good. We had a good time. And he was like, anyway, it was a thing. Which, I totally had forgotten about that until like 2 days ago. I was like, wait a minute. But when you talk about some of the feral humans that are in the Smoky Mountains, right? And they talk about the Dennis Martin story where he basically disappeared and you had Green Berets looking for him and Boy Scouts looking for him and all that. And there was an idea that he'd been kidnapped by like a family. Mm-hmm. This same article that I'm reading here, and this is from the Smokies.com, from Smoky Mountains, right? Talks about that, with feral humans in the Smoky Mountains, it says one of the most popular involved wild men. And those are feral men, or feral human, I should say, who live in the mountains and go about snatching livestock and children at night. And so, there's videos, not of the wild men, but of authoritative sounding people discussing wild men. And the FBI cover-up as if it's common knowledge. Right? Oh. These wild men are something akin to little big feet, and these are humans who lived in the wild for so long that they're closer to beasts than men. They have their own language, and apparently quite a putrid smell that forewarns of their arrival, which is just as ineffective feral, if you ask me. Allegedly, they're cannibals too, and it makes you wonder what they're doing to the livestock, or with the livestock. So what if some of these reports that you hear where people smell, because I've heard reports where people say you can smell Bigfoot coming, and other reports saying you won't smell Bigfoot at all.
Yeah.
Unless he's like the skunk ape living in a swamp. So what if some of these reports were talk about, some throwing rocks and all that stuff, and the Bigfoot was like 6 feet tall, is really just a wild man living in the woods throwing rocks at you. And stinking.
And see, that's the thing, because it wasn't until recently that people started talking about the Bigfoot stink.
Right.
And then when Bigfoot encounters, we would hear about them in the Southwest. You wouldn't get that a lot.
Right.
Well, people and Bigfoot...
People stink.
It takes a lot to get them to... It takes a lot for them to stink, but in the Southwest, people stink. But not many of the Bigfoot encounters did talk about Bigfoot stinking in the Southwest.
Right.
So, in the Southwest, yeah, that makes total sense. Feral person, yeah, stinky.
Well, around here, it makes total sense, too. Feral person, also stinking. I mean, if you don't take a shower for a month, you're going to stink.
Oh, yeah.
Now, do you stink like a bear in the woods kind of stink? Probably not. You're going to stink like a human. And if you're already human to begin with and you know what a clean human smells like versus a stinky human, it has more effect on you than a smell of a bear. Bears don't smell good. Bears smell like bear.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And it's like, maybe these wild men aren't so feral, right? And wild men could be descendants of mountain people who went deep in the forests before there was a park and lived there, right? And I don't think people realize that the park, there were people living in these parks before they became parks. That's like you can be in a national park and be in the middle of nowhere and find a house or a cabin.
Yeah.
They've been there way before the park was established to be a park.
Well, there's one right out in this area where it was two sisters who lived on the land, and then when it started to turn into a park, they came into an agreement. Oh, you guys can live the rest of your lives here, and then once it's over with,
or once it's out of the family, then we own it, kind of a thing. It happened in Southwest a lot too.
Yeah,
and you've got all these reports, like one guy who made a nice video walking his weenie dog through a cemetery, and there's a cemetery in this park, and so you got wild people who spoke English. Maybe they're speaking their own language, like Nell and Chicopee and all that stuff.
Stop that.
But that's what she says, right?
I never watched it.
And see, and here's where some of the rumors that you hear, in this particular article, the same guy indicated his uncles were paid by the FBI to hunt and kill the wild people prior to Dennis's appearance. Because in the Dennis Martin incident, they were thinking that they were snatched by wild men. Mm-hmm. And that the FBI had sent some people in there to take care of the wild men, and that's a possibility why he was taken. I don't really know because I didn't do too much research on the Dennis Martin story. But he also brings up the Vietnam-era Green Berets, because allegedly there was 71 Green Berets that were in the area doing exercises when they tried to go help them in the search. Right? It says they were reportedly brought in because of their expertise in dense, wet jungle.
Yeah.
Right? That's where they fought in Vietnam. But our conspiracist friends would have us believe that they weren't there as part of a search party. So the story was that they were there doing exercises to train, because in the Appalachian Mountains it acts like a rainforest and it's pretty dense. And that, they were there and they joined a search party to help out just because they happened to be there. But conspiracy theory is that they were brought in to take care of the wild people. Like they knew the wild people were there, and you got to make sure to keep these people in line. We've also heard stories in the past about, how the government actually knows about Bigfoot, right? And tribes of Bigfoot. And they have these teams that will go in and take care of Bigfoot who get out of control, right? Like around Boone Mountain incident, and also places out in the Southwest. We've heard about that. And what if they're not going after Bigfoot? What if they're keeping these wild people corralled and making sure they keep them under control?
But see, that also goes back to like my agreement with Bigfoot and like Teddy Roosevelt and the weird mapping of national parks and national monuments. Some of them, if you really look at it, the mapping of these national parks makes no sense. The territory that is drawn, even from like a geologic perspective, a lot of these parks should be either more or less.
Yeah.
And now, if you were containing a roaming or nomadic group of people, or
you mean like a band of cannibalistic feral humans roaming the park and abducting and eating folk?
Bipedal apes, then it would make sense, because it would be following like a migratory pattern. That's why I have such a hang up with the way some of the national parks are plotted out, and it's so much so that like things like the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, when they were doing construction, they were accidentally building stuff outside of the national parks because the boundary lines are so convoluted.
Well, yeah,
and they had their own encounters with feral people. So I don't know. It's,
and the thing about this article is, I'm not going through reading the whole thing because it goes back and forth on points and things like that.
Yeah.
But it kind of goes down and says, when you talk about some of the feral people, like hermits, nomads, and getting off the grid, says while the idea of feral wild people isn't exactly likely, the mountains are a good place for people to want to get lost. I mean, you have it happen, right? It says, could a hermit do it anywhere near Cades Cove? No. And the reason being is it's pretty populated, right? But we read stories about people who adopt new identities and go live on the trail as long hikers. And you also hear about murderers, even the terrorist bomber Eric Rudolph, who go in the mountains to hide.
Yep.
That dude got caught digging in a dumpster. If he was in the woods, you never would have found him. They didn't find him for a long time.
Was it like a decade or something? I don't remember.
It was a long time.
It was a long time, yeah. And then there's there's been other serial killers and other people who it's taken years because they were either on or just barely off the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, with the Dennis Martin incident, is it likely that he was taken by feral humans and all that? I mean, who knows? I mean, but like in any place that you look at in Appalachia in general, right? Mm-hmm. In these areas, especially in the parks and things like that, you're going to have the typical black bear. You have bears, and you have like snakes, and you have insects, and all this sort of stuff. So it's probably more likely that he was taken by wildlife. Yeah. That would make sense. Although, if there really is feral people, I mean, who's to say?
And
there are examples of like feral people and stuff. And it's not like something. I think it's something that actually is more likely than Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I mean, which is more of which has a stronger possibility of occurring. People that get fed up with society and leave and go off and live in these areas by themselves and shed all the human constraints of living in society and have no societal norms put on them anymore and doing their own things and trying to protect territory, or a giant bipedal primate, lost race, lost splinter of humanity, Neanderthal, something like that, living off in the woods and been hiding from everybody for thousands of years. We've met some weird people in Walmart who basically came back out of the desert. Like, man, you can tell that dude's been in the desert for like living, 50 miles out in the middle of nowhere, coming back in. It's like, dude, I could smell you coming. And it was obvious that they lived way out there. Like once a month, they come into Walmart and load up.
I ranted about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I had to come home and do the podcast episode after. And here's the messed up thing. The dude was talking to people I knew through like my job. And he just walked up. He's like, yeah, I haven't been to Walmart in about 2 months. And he was coming in to get his water. And he looked like he had gone to Burning Man and got lost and didn't find his way back home for 2 months. That's what the dude looked like.
Yeah.
and he was unwashed.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, think about it. And even if you go back and you look like fur trappers and things like that who go out and check their lines out in the middle of nowhere, they typically wore fur.
Yeah.
Fur keeps you warm. So what if you're living out in the woods and you're trying to keep yourself warm or whatever? You're going to use your resources while you're out there. If you're not going into Walmart after a month to buy water, you're going to use what you got. And that includes like deer skin and bear fur or is it deer fur? Anyway, you're going to use your natural resources. So you'd wear them like clothes. And if you've seen a, say, 6-foot person has a couple bear skins on, cruising through the woods, doing their own thing, if I seen that from a distance, having no reference to know that there would be possibly feral people, I would say, man, I think that's Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Not like, hey, that's some dude wearing animal skins. Back in the, say, 1800s, you would say that's a wild man, that's a fur trader, that's a hunter, because that's the skins and stuff they'd be wearing in that environment.
Yeah.
There's no Gore-Tex back then.
No.
You know what I mean? So you would see it. You wouldn't think Bigfoot. You'd think that's a wild man in the woods because obviously they live away from society, and not everybody lived in a town back then. So, I mean, hey, going into town's a big deal. Coming down off the mountain's a big deal too.
Yeah.
I don't know. So if you look at what's more likely in some of these areas with missing people reports and everything else, now, I'm not saying it's real or going to happen or it is a thing, but it would be more likely that, it's the higher possibility of being a reality would be that a feral person, right, is more likely than a Bigfoot. I'm not saying that Bigfoot doesn't exist, but I'm just saying some of these encounters, maybe that's the real issue, is that there's a blending of all of this. Some of these sightings of people out in the, things being seen out in the woods that people have seen, maybe they're not actually as many Bigfoot or Sasquatch related sightings, or is it just some random dude who lives there who's hiding behind a tree because he sees you and he wants to remain hidden?
Okay. I'm just going to point this out. So we're also saying many UFO sightings are actually unmanned drones.
Or military technology.
And now we're saying a lot of Bigfoot sightings might actually be feral people.
Or just people who are living out in the woods.
Okay. Yeah. So we are still a paranormal podcast, but we are rationalizing some.
We are paranormal and weird news.
Yes.
I mean, you got to look at this in a rational, sort of sensical way.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the only way to be objective, to actually discern between something that's normal and paranormal, is you got to be a little skeptical.
Yeah.
And see, and the way I'm coming at it is just some random people living out in the woods, they've probably been generational or whatever, scares me more than the idea of Bigfoot. And
it would also explain some of the more evolved Bigfoot encounters, like where they're retrieving or giving gifts.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
And I'm not saying that Bigfoot doesn't exist. I would like to think that Bigfoot exists, and I'm definitely not on the Bigfoot doesn't exist camp. I think that there is way more encounters that can't be explained. I'm just saying that I think some of these encounters, even if they appear and have all the characteristics of a Bigfoot encounter, may not actually be Bigfoot. Maybe some weird-ass people living in the woods who basically said, the heck with society, I'm going to do my own thing. And that's not uncommon. You've got people that have gone off and lived on their own, and sometimes they actually send people to them to get answers.
Yeah, and maybe they're trending right now because just like the rest of nature that started to grow back when 2020 happened, maybe these feral people started to venture further. And we always deal with the concept of encroachment on nature. So maybe they started to encroach back. And that's why we're seeing.
And as a matter of fact, you talk to somebody who knows somebody who basically is trying to be more in tune with nature, who goes out and wears animal skins and dances and communes with nature.
Yes.
I mean, come on.
In an alleged UFO and Bigfoot hotspot.
There you go.
So,
with that being said, I think that some sightings that are being seen and the correlation of being in national parks. Because in a national park, man, it's a national park. Once you're in, nobody really goes and says, oh, time's up, you got to leave.
I mean, there's posted rules at some of them, but still, it's just posted
rules. And the further you get into, I mean, come on. The further you get out there, the less likely you're going to run into somebody and less likely you're going to run into things like, civilization encroaching and stuff. You might run across a pipeline, but they're not knocking down all the trees to put up a Walmart in the middle of a national park. That's probably the best place to go. It's protected.
Though our friend Jen...
And BLM land and everything.
Her and I were talking recently about, kind of about this issue. And she pointed out something that is not paranormal or very feral people-ish. She did point out, as we all start to venture more outdoors, we're going to notice certain things. And one of those is some of these groups of people, whether we see them or not, whether they're trying to evade us or not, they might just be doing something simple as moonshining, which is very common in the Appalachian history, or constructing something else out there that they're not supposed to construct.
Yeah. And, I mean, you're not supposed to, in some places, you're definitely not allowed to build hunting blinds.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to just randomly dig for gold.
So if you come across those people and they're deliberately trying to avoid you, go ahead and avoid them, because they don't want to be seen, because the consequences of whatever they're doing out there.
Yeah. Or if you look at the people that were growing acres of weed.
Yeah.
You never know who you're going to run into.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is about some of the, 401 and missing people and along the cave systems in these national parks and stuff like that, you also can't rule out things like human trafficking.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you look at the instances of human trafficking, the possibility of wild people living in the woods, or feral, this is called feral people, and Sasquatch, I mean, it all ties in together. And I think a lot of the reports that we actually see, I think it's an amalgamation of all of that. And it all sort of depends on what side of the fence you want to lean on when it comes to what you believe is real or not, when it comes to Bigfoot and things like that. Yeah. I think it's sadly more likely that you run across, instances and reports of Sasquatch and Bigfoots in the woods that are basically people. Yeah. But at the same time, I think there's, on the other side, there's probably just as many reports of stuff that can't be explained that are not people.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the whole, supernatural side of things, and you're talking about things in the woods, because Appalachian Mountains in general, some of the oldest on the planet, period, they're ancient. They're not regular. They're not new and geologically.
And our circle of friends does believe that there are entities that the most basic explanation you could come down to possibly would be elementals.
Yep.
And that those elementals, due to this area being so old, have firmly taken root here because of what this region is. It is a lush
Well, you also got to look at where they came from. Most of them came from places like Ireland and Scotland, and they have their own lore and legends there. And they brought the Fae folk with them. And it doesn't help that when they got here, the native people were talking about watch out for the little people and the moon-eyed people, and watch out for this. So it all sort of lends itself all together. But either way, I think we're just about done with this particular podcast. So we kind of wrapped a bunch of different things in there. It's just primarily speculating about the idea of feral people in general, and is it all related? Who knows?
Yeah.
No. Well, we also know that the UFO stuff is probably, in the disclosure report that's coming, is probably going to be much the same. And that's, hey, we don't know what it is, but, aliens, maybe not.
Now, we only hit upon Dennis Martin and one other case, I believe. But if you guys want to explore a lot of these missing people, some of the missing 411 cases and the feral people cases that we've been kind of dancing around during this podcast episode, please check the show notes. Everything we talk about in the show notes of the podcast. They should show up on whatever your favorite podcast platform is, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Google Play Podcasts, Spotify. We're all over the place, so feel free to tune in that way. If you have any questions, you can also go to our website, and a lot of our links are on there. We do want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you are interested in supporting us on Patreon, it's going to be patreon.com/CreepGeeks. So, and follow us on TikTok.
Sure.
Yes. So, links are in the podcast notes.
Yes.
Questions, comments, contact at creepgeeks.com or 575-208-4025.
There you go. And if you made it this long in the podcast, we're glad to have you here. And what do you think? Do you think the idea that feral people are out there, or that wild people are out in the woods that are causing some of these reported sightings? Think it's all related? What do you think? Or are we just, talking about this stuff from a burrito's perspective?
Oh, it's patreon.com/creepgeeks. I got to make that link more.
What did you say?
CreepGeeks Podcast.
You're fired. Send you out in the woods.
Anyway, all right. Gladly.
Wear your bear skins. Probably get shot at by some random dude. Like that report, it was in where? I think it was in UAP where that dude was shooting at Bigfoot went running through the camp.
No, that was in Tennessee.
All right, in Tennessee. That dude was shooting at Bigfoot who was running through his... Yeah, Cage Cove. Wasn't it Cage? No. Anyway. What if the dude he was shooting at was really just some dude, some homeless dude who's been living in the woods, who come across some bear skins. He's cruising through the woods and some dude's just randomly shooting at him. That guy's probably terrified to death.
Mammoth Cave.
Hey, okay, that's in Kentucky.
Yes.
See, there you go. That guy was running back to his cave, went running through because some guy's shooting at him in a campsite.
Yeah.
Who knows? Anyway, that's all we got. So, thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. So, see you later. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Bye.